Salisbury Plain, England, September 14th, 1934. A low mist drifted across the rolling fields, the pale morning light glinting faintly off lines of armoured steel. Dozens of engines idled, coughing smoke into the chill air. In the command tank, Brigadier Percy Hobart adjusted his headset, his fingers steady despite the electric tension building around him. Static crackled through the receiver, then voices, 23 of them, the commanders of every tank under his command, scattered over 12 miles of open countryside. He waited, listening. His finger hovered over the transmit button. He knew that one press would ignite not just the exercise, but a career-defining rebellion. Around him, through binoculars, the British Army's most senior officers stood watching from a distant ridge. These were men of an older generation, cavalry generals, infantry traditionalists who believed that tanks were lumbering beasts meant to crawl behind infantry, not lead the charge. They had already written their reports condemning the day's experiment before it even began. Hobart exhaled slowly, pressed the button, and spoke. All stations, Sunray. Execute Plan Mongoose. I say again, execute Plan Mongoose. Across the plain, 23 tank engines roared to life at once. Dust and vibration rippled across the field as the formation split and scattered. They didn't crawl forward in neat lines or wait for flag signals. They moved like a living organism, coordinated, fluid, fast, guided not by sight or runners but by invisible waves of radio energy bouncing through the air. 3 groups broke away. The northern formation feinted toward the enemy's supposed position. The southern force vanished behind a line of ridges, cutting wide through hidden ground. The central group stayed put, engines rumbling, throwing up dust clouds thick enough to hide entire movements. The umpire's senior cavalry officers assigned to judge the exercise scrambled in confusion. Through their binoculars, the scene dissolved into chaos. Tanks appeared and vanished. Lines broke and reformed. Nothing fit the doctrine they'd been taught. 16 minutes later, the southern group reappeared 3 miles behind the enemy's headquarters. In a real war, the battle would already be finished. The enemy's command chain decapitated, their artillery silenced, their infantry leaderless. But instead of declaring victory, the umpires halted the exercise and ruled Hobart's tactics invalid. His use of radios was unrealistic, his coordination unfair. When the chief umpire, General Archibald Wavell, arrived at Hobart's tank, his expression was granite. "This," he said coldly, "is not how the British Army fights, Brigadier. Your methods are—" He hesitated, searching for a word, unsporting. Hobart said nothing. He just removed his headset, resting it across the turret, his jaw set. He already understood. He had just proven that his tanks could fight as one, and the army would destroy him for it. What Wavell didn't know was that, 400 miles away in Germany, a colonel named Heinz Guderian would soon read the intelligence reports describing this very exercise. Guderian would take notes, he would smile, and 5 years later he would use Hobart's exact tactics to smash through France, drive the British Army to Dunkirk, and change the course of modern warfare. By then, Hobart would no longer command tanks. He would have been forced into the Home Guard, demoted to corporal, punished for the greatest sin in the British military, being right when his superiors were wrong. To understand how it happened, you have to understand the British Army of the 1922nd, an army that had learned all the wrong lessons from the Great War. The trenches had ended in 1918, leaving millions dead and nations scarred. Tanks had arrived late in that conflict, slow, lumbering machines that crept across no man's land at walking speed. They terrified infantry but broke down constantly, and the generals who had fought that war saw them only as support tools for foot soldiers. The British High Command believed the future of warfare still belonged to horses, rifles, and courage. A few visionaries disagreed. Among them was Captain Basil Liddell Hart, a brilliant theorist who wrote in 1921, "The tank will restore mobility to warfare. The army that masters it will dominate the next conflict." His articles were published, studied, and then quietly ignored in London. In Germany, They were translated, annotated, and taught in secret military schools. By 1933, British tank doctrine was chaos. Communication between tanks relied on flag signals or couriers on motorcycles. When a tank commander wanted to send a message, he often had to stop his vehicle, climb out under fire, and run across open ground. Many never made it back. The statistics were damning. Since 1918, Britain had built just over 200 tanks. Germany, officially banned from producing any, had secretly constructed nearly double that. Yet, inside the War Office, the men in charge, infantry and cavalry generals, dismissed radio as a fad, a distraction, an expensive toy. To these men, a tank was an extension of the cavalry, a metal horse. And to suggest otherwise wasn't just heresy, it was career suicide. Several officers tried. Lieutenant Colonel George Lindsay proposed an independent tank brigade in 1925. He was quietly sent to India. Colonel J.F.C. Fuller, who had written the first full plan for mechanized warfare, was pushed into early retirement. The message was unmistakable. Innovation would be punished, not rewarded. Then came Percy Hobart, a man who refused to stop thinking. Born in 1885 inches, India, Hobart's background was as traditional as any officer's could be. Educated at Woolwich, commissioned into the Royal Engineers, he was brave, disciplined, and early on, entirely conventional. During the Great War, he served in France and the Middle East, winning the Distinguished Service Order and Military Cross. But as he watched men die by the tens of thousands, year after year, he began to lose faith in the system that produced such waste. He saw what he called military buffoonery, the worship of outdated tradition over practical results. After the war, his peers considered him brilliant but difficult. He spoke his mind too plainly, questioned orders too often, in an army built on hierarchy that made him dangerous. In 1923, Hobart made a decision that shocked everyone. He transferred to the Royal Tank Corps. It was a backwater, a dead end for ambitious officers. But Hobart didn't care about prestige. He cared about change. He began reading everything he could. Liddell Hart, Fuller, historical campaigns by Genghis Khan, Napoleon's rapid marches, even Mongol encirclement tactics. He studied not what tanks were, but what they could be. When he took command of the 2nd Battalion, Royal Tank Corps, in 1931, he started breaking rules. His tanks practiced night maneuvers. They operated with aircraft, something the Army and Royal Air Force both despised, and he began demanding that every tank carry a wireless set, the primitive British No. 11 radio. His superiors called him obsessed. One general complained, "Hobart talks of nothing but wireless sets." He was right. Hobart had calculated the math. A tank moving at 20 miles per hour could cover 500 yards in 1 minute. But an order transmitted by runner or flag could take 10 minutes or more to reach its target. Radios turned minutes into seconds. He argued that a tank brigade with radios could fight like a single creature, adapting, reacting, attacking faster than the enemy could respond. A $50 radio, he told them, was worth more than thicker armour or a bigger gun. When he took command of Britain's only permanent armoured formation, 1st Tank Brigade in January 1934, he inherited 60 tanks and just 19 radios. The War Office refused to buy more, too costly, too fragile, too unmilitary. So Hobart went around them. In the workshops of Lulworth Camp, Dorset, he gathered a secret team, not just soldiers, but civilian engineers, university students, even a young woman named Margaret Thompson, who specialized in grinding quartz crystals for radio frequencies. Hobart showed her how those crystals powered communication between tanks spread miles apart. "Every word depends on the crystals you grind," he told her. "Every life depends on your precision." She would later say it was the first time she understood that her quiet, repetitive work could change the world. Their equipment was crude, unreliable, and fragile. The vacuum tubes overheated, static filled the lines, dust shorted circuits. But Hobart's team redesigned everything. New shielding, cleaner power lines, improved antennas, new call signs, and brevity codes. They practiced for hours every day in rain, in fog, in total darkness, until tank crews could drive, shoot, navigate, and talk simultaneously. Most controversial of all, Hobart rewrote the chain of command. In his system, any tank commander could speak directly to brigade headquarters. No more messages crawling up and down the hierarchy. The War Office called it anarchy. Hobart called it modern war. By September, the 1st Tank Brigade was ready. The stage was set for the Salisbury Plain manoeuvres, the demonstration that would define Hobart's life. That morning, as dawn broke over the rolling hills, his second-in-command asked the question everyone feared. "Sir, what if they rule against us? What if they say the radios don't count?" Hobart didn't hesitate. "Then we'll prove it again, and again, until they can't deny reality." He didn't know that reality would take 5 years to arrive, and it would wear German uniforms. The 3-day exercise should have been his victory. Instead, it became his crucifixion. Against a simulated enemy of 2 full infantry divisions, supported by cavalry and artillery, Hobart's brigade of 600 men should have been crushed. Instead, they outmaneuvered their opponents completely. Using radio coordination, they covered 40 miles of ground in hours, appearing behind enemy lines before anyone realized they'd moved. The umpires, desperate to regain control, declared the exercise void. When the official report was published, it dismissed Hobart's success as unrealistic. Radio signals would never work in combat. Tanks could not act independently. Coordination at that level was theoretically interesting but operationally impossible. When Hobart read it, he went pale with fury. Days later, in the officers' mess at Tidworth Barracks, he confronted Wavell and the other generals face to face. "General," he said, standing before 24 senior officers, "your report ignores the evidence. My brigade moved 40 miles and seized the enemy headquarters in 6 hours. Are you seriously suggesting that speed and coordination are disadvantages?" A murmur rippled through the room. Wavell's face darkened. "Brigadier Hobart," another officer snapped, "you will address the general with respect. This discussion is closed." But Hobart didn't back down. "In the next war, and there will be a next war, our enemies will not fight by your rules. They'll use every advantage, speed, coordination, technology. If we cling to outdated doctrine, we'll send our soldiers to die for tradition." A cavalry colonel stood abruptly. "Enough, Hobart. Your methods are unsporting. They undermine the very honour of battle." Hobart's reply would echo through history. "There is no honour in losing, no glory in dead men killed by our own stubbornness. If radio coordination is unsporting, then I'm proud to be unsporting." The room fell silent. The next morning, Hobart was ordered to apologise in writing. He refused. Days later, the Secretary of State for War formally apologised not to Hobart, but to the cavalry regiments, for the disruption caused by mechanisation. Hobart's fate was sealed, but someone had been watching. In October 1934, Winston Churchill, then a mere backbench MP, invited Hobart to his apartment. For 4 hours they talked about tactics, radios, and the stubborn blindness of the army. When Hobart finished, Churchill said quietly, "I can't help you now. I have no power. But if I ever do, I won't let men like you be wasted." Hobart doubted it meant anything. He was wrong. It would take 6 years, a world war, and Britain's darkest hour before that promise was kept. Salisbury Plain, England, 1934, had been the stage of Hobart's triumph and persecution, but the story of Percy Hobart was far from over. Between 1934 and the outbreak of the Second World War, Hobart became both Britain's greatest prophet of armoured warfare and its most embattled pariah. In 1936, he was promoted to Major General, an acknowledgement of his brilliance on paper. But when it came to real command, the War Office blocked his appointment. They gave command of Britain's first modern armoured division to a cavalry officer whose last assignment had been training writing instructors. The obstruction was total, bureaucratic, and cruel. Hobart was instead made Director of Military Training. For a single year, he wielded some influence over the Army's training programs. Even here, he pushed for realism, combined arms exercises, night operations, and above all, radio coordination. Yet the generals worked around him, undermining his authority. By 1938, he was sent to Egypt to raise the Mobile Division, a scattered assortment of obsolete tanks languishing under desert sun. Here, in a harsh environment and against impossible odds, Hobart's genius emerged again. Within 18 months, he transformed the Mobile Division into the legendary 7th Armoured Division, soon to be immortalized as the Desert Rats. His methods were uncompromising. Every commander learned to use radios while navigating, coordinating, and engaging simultaneously. Units practiced moving at night, simulating the chaos of real combat. Every maneuver, every exercise, every tank commander drilled until instinct replaced thought. Observers like Lieutenant General Richard O'Connor later described it as the best trained division they had ever witnessed. Yet personal grudges, professional jealousy, and social snobbery meant that Hobart's brilliance could not shield him. On the 10th of November 1939, barely 2 months after Britain declared war on Germany, Hobart was relieved of command. Officially, he had lacked cooperation with fellow officers and overemphasized mechanization. The truth was far simpler. He had been right, and that made him dangerous. Meanwhile, the world Hobart had predicted was unfolding with ruthless accuracy. The 1st of September 1939, Poland. Heinz Guderian's panzers crossed the border, radios humming, formations moving at speeds Polish forces could not match. Independent armoured groups penetrated deep behind the front lines, encircling divisions, isolating infantry, neutralizing artillery. In 16 days, Poland had fallen. Every tactic Guderian employed had its roots in Hobart's forbidden exercises from Salisbury Plain. Britain's greatest armoured warfare innovator was sidelined at home, watching the methods he pioneered wreak havoc in enemy hands. Hobart's personal situation was stark. Back in England, he had joined the Home Guard as a lance corporal. 55 years old, he drilled teenagers and elderly men with broomsticks, in a civilian suit, under a white armband. He was a corporal, the lowest rank, yet he was still Britain's foremost expert in armour, and the enemy's tanks were already using his innovations. The irony was bitter. But Hobart's influence was far from gone. On the 11th of August 1940, Captain Basil Liddell Hart published a searing exposé in the Sunday Pictorial titled "We Have Wasted Brains." It featured Hobart in his corporal uniform, detailing how Britain's premier armoured strategist had been sidelined while Germany perfected the very tactics he had pioneered. Winston Churchill, now Prime Minister, remembered the promise he had made 6 years earlier. Fury drove him to action. By October, Churchill had sent a memorandum to General Sir John Dill, the Chief of the Imperial General Staff. "Men of force and vision," he wrote, "must not be wasted in wartime because they were unconventional." Hobart was recalled. On the 14th of November 1940, Percy Hobart met Churchill at Chequers. Within a month, he was restored to high command, taking over the 11th Armoured Division. He immediately applied the same brutal training regimen he had used with the 7th: night operations, radio coordination, independent manoeuvring, combined arms exercises. The division quickly became one of Britain's finest, disciplined and lethal. By March 1943, he was entrusted with an even more critical mission, commanding the 79th Armoured Division, charged with developing specialized armor for the invasion of Europe. Hobart's vision had evolved. He created the famous Hobart's Funnies, amphibious tanks, mine-clearing flails, bridge-laying vehicles, flamethrowers, all coordinated via radio, all operated by commanders trained for independent maneuver. These machines were not gimmicks. They were tools of survival, designed to ensure that Allied forces could land on fortified beaches without being slaughtered in the first hours of combat. The 6th of June 1944 D-Day. On Sword, Juno, and Gold Beaches, Hobart's specialized armor led the assault. Coordinated by the radio networks he had fought for a decade earlier, tanks flailed through mines, laid bridges in minutes, and provided direct fire support to infantry. British casualties on these beaches totaled approximately 1,000 dead and 3,000 wounded, a fraction of what they would have suffered without Hobart's machines. On Omaha Beach, where American commanders had declined to use similar armor, casualties soared to 2,400 inches the first hours alone. General Dwight Eisenhower later wrote that the novel mechanical devices Hobart developed were crucial to reducing casualties, allowing the assault forces to establish themselves and survive. The radio tactics of 1934, once dismissed as impossible, had saved thousands of lives in 1944. By the end of the war, Hobart's 79th Armored Division had grown into the largest armored formation in the world, comprising over 1,000 vehicles, all coordinated by radio, all trained in independent maneuver. The division supported operations from Normandy to the Rhine, working seamlessly with American and Canadian forces. General William Simpson, commander of the U.S. Ninth Army, called Hobart the most outstanding British officer of high rank he had met during the war. The statistics tell the story. In 1934, only 89 British tanks had radios. Hobart's tactics were officially unrealistic. By 1944, every Allied tank was equipped with radios, and the principles Hobart pioneered were standard doctrine. Eisenhower estimated that 15,000 lives had been saved through radio coordination alone. Hobart received a knighthood from King George VI in 1945, and the United States awarded him the Legion of Merit, degree of commander. Even Germany, his former enemy, incorporated his tactical innovations into post-war military studies, noting, "Hobart, the man we copied, whom Britain tried to destroy." The greatest tribute came from his former students. Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, who commanded XXX Corps during Operation Market Garden, visited Hobart in November 1945 at his modest home near Oxford. Finding his former instructor pruning roses in the garden, Horrocks said simply, "Sir, I wanted to thank you. Everything you taught, radio coordination, independent maneuver, combined arms, we used it all. Thousands of my men came home because of you." Hobart's response was pure Hobart. "Did you learn the lesson then, sir? That being right is more important than being popular, that saving lives is more important than protecting egos?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Then it wasn't a complete waste of time." By 1945, the British Army had manufactured 47,000 radio sets for armoured vehicles, up from 89 inches 1,934. Hobart's forbidden radio tactics were standard doctrine: network-centric warfare, UAV swarms, distributed operations, all descendants of his vision, modern US. Army manuals still echo his principles. Decentralized execution enabled by robust communications allows tempo and initiative. Hobart had written the textbook in 1934. The Army had only learned to read it decades later. Percy Hobart died on the 19th of February 1957 at age 71. He shunned fame and declined multiple memoir offers. His obituary in the Times was 11 lines long, but Basil Liddell Hart captured his essence. Percy Hobart was one of the few soldiers I have known who could be rightly termed a military genius. He combined vision with practical knowledge, saw the future when others were trapped in the past, and paid the price that prophets always pay. The moral is clear. Institutions fear change more than defeat. They punish innovation more harshly than failure. Sometimes, the person called crazy is the only one who is sane. Percy Hobart proved them wrong. And because he did, thousands of soldiers returned home alive. His legacy is the modern battlefield, connected, mobile, and alive with the voice of a commander who refused to accept the impossible. Archive photographs roll across the screen. Hobart inspecting tanks, crews operating radios, the first waves of D-Day, and the funnies in action. The triumph, the tragedy, and the ultimate redemption of Britain's most visionary armoured commander is complete.